Well, good morning, everybody. I want to start off today by looking at the last 7 days of total accumulated precipitation. And again, what last week was really dominated by was a deep low that was off the coast of California that did finally make its way onshore. In fact, over the weekend, as it did so, some pretty nasty storms actually moved through parts of Arizona, including a single tornado report in central Arizona. We then watched that tropical-looking system that slowly slid, right here along the Gulf Coast before getting down to southern Florida and then making its way up the East Coast. But it was knocked out by a frontal boundary that came through, keeping it pretty far away from shore. We had some snow north, and this is the newest piece on the map right here. We finally got that low that was over the west to kick out into the mountains. We're going to watch it over the next about 48 hours as it increases the risk of severe weather to the south and eventually over the southeast as well. But it's going to be delivering rain into some really, really dry areas. So I wanted to show you the latest month-to-date precipitation ranks by climate district, just to show you how dry parts of the Midwest, mid-south, getting over into the mid-Atlantic, and then up into the northeast things have really been. We have a couple climate reporting districts that are reporting the driest on record, like this one right here in kind of down here in southeastern Missouri. This is the driest start to any November on record. So to see some moisture finally moving into this area is going to be very, very welcomed. But you know, I talked a lot about this pattern in last week's videos as being a pretty big failure on my part and on others, and on the model at like picking up why it was so dry in this area. Had you asked me at the end of October, I would have thought much more moisture recovery into this area, and we thought we had better support for it given the position and strength of the Pacific Jet. So just as a quick reminder, I went back and grabbed this. This was the outlook released at the 23rd of October, looking at what November was supposed to be according to the ECMWF, one of our better performing models. And it was wet west. Okay, could we say that happened? Sure. And then you add in this weekend's rainfall. We've done okay in the west. It's not been maybe as wet as what was originally advertised, but this was the area that I think really got me. You know, I think I projected better troughs from that MJO phase 1, phase 8 here, sending systems through, but instead they've stayed much farther to the south, and as a result, this was a big miss. I mean, a big miss in this area. We've also seen drought expand in that region, especially getting into the lower Mississippi River Valley over toward the Appalachian Mountains. And our latest drought monitor released last Thursday just continues to show these stresses around the country. So from here, let's take a look at one other metric on recent precipitation, and this is the last 14 days. And I want to point out that, honestly, since the event that happened on Halloween, there's a large section of the country in through here that has not seen any form of precipitation until this morning, some of the stuff that's coming through this area. The same can be said for the Mid-Atlantic, getting up here into New England as well. So these three maps just really allow us to dive into how dry things have been this fall. And it all culminates with the water that has to get into the major river systems, which would be the Mississippi Basin here. And we've watched it tank back off again this morning at 9.17 feet below low stage. So after a very brief recovery, I mean, I can't really call that a recovery, but jumping up there at about 4 to 5 feet below low stage, it's lost all of that back. And we're now back down here to about 9.5 feet below low stage. Okay, well, here's the system we've been waiting on. And can we call this one of our two big systems to finish the month? I don't know. It's there. It's spinning. There's moisture in it. It's moving relatively slowly. I like all of those things, but it's not the cure-all for the drought issues we've been seeing in parts of the central United States. Now, with this system, as it curls its way up, there's going to be a snow threat. We're going to watch it get into New England as well, really punching hard into New England. But before it gets there, we're going to have to watch the lower Mississippi River Valley today for some severe weather. Early this morning, we were already watching quite a bit of lightning coming out of Oklahoma into Arkansas. So this was a live lightning map pretty early this morning here, just picking up on some of these pretty active storms. And the air that's coming into this area, we can kind of trace it back. It's kind of fun to see this. It started in Africa, moved through parts of, southern Europe, but then got its momentum really picked up here in parts of Russia, exited out of China, came across the open Pacific. And it's this last bit. Kind of see how it dives down here and then comes up into the south, kind of at this angle that's maybe coming out of Texas into this area. This just tells me that it's going to have the right upper level support to develop these severe storms. So later on this afternoon, this will be what our surface winds are going to look like. Very strong winds out of the north, diving on the backside of this low. We're pulling in a decent amount of moisture off of the Gulf, so we're going to keep an eye right into this corridor here for the risk of those strong and severe storms. Interestingly enough, two other things here. actually maybe 3. The winds have reversed in the Tejano Pass, so see now they're coming out of the Pacific into the Bay of Campeche. Look how strong the winds are coming out of the north here in kind of the southwestern United States, sliding right here to the Baja of California. And another thing to note, our third thing is most of the systems that are coming across the Pacific are going to lose their kind of jet stream momentum and push themselves into British Columbia rather than hitting the west for the next 10 plus days. So with that all as a setup, let's just take a look at the maps that kind of decide for us what to expect in terms of weather. And we're going to start on the severe weather side of this. This is today's SPC outlook. So they've got a pretty large area down here, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi. Remember, one of our driest spots in the country compared to average that's got the risk for strong to severe storms. And I've seen some simulations that would recommend to me to tell you that some of these storms will be rotating, which means there is a threat today for supercell development and tornadoes. As the system moves east tomorrow, we do see, again, a marginal risk across a broad area of the southeast, getting up into the Carolinas here, with this one area here still under a slight risk for severe storms. So that's your next 2 days in terms of severe weather threat. Let's take a look at today's all hazards weather map just a hair before 6 a.m. this morning. Quite a bit of wind. Okay, so you can see each of the blocks of coloring that look like this. These are all where we have wind advisories or high wind watches and warnings in California. We do have winter weather advisories out for part of the Rockies and a sliver here of the Appalachian Mountains. And then there's some dense fog in Florida and in parts of the Pacific Northwest where there's also a freeze watch that's been issued here for this part of California. To show you what these winds are going to do, though, I'm going to go right to the high-res NAM. And if we play this forward through today, getting into tomorrow, we're just going to take this out until Wednesday here. There is going to be some really strong winds forecast for parts of eastern Tennessee, getting over the Appalachian Mountains, coming off of Lake Erie. So be prepared for some pretty stout wind gusts out of this system. And this is all before it really wraps itself up into New England. Also, much of the western and high plains are expecting to have some pretty strong winds out of this, which we talked about last week. And again, today, we're still paying very close attention to these strong winds in Southern California. All right, on the precipitation side of it, this is the high-res NAM starting at 6 a.m. this morning. We're going to watch that low curl up out of Kansas into Missouri, spreading tonight a pretty broad shield of rainfall from Iowa and Illinois, Missouri, getting into parts of western Kentucky, Tennessee, southwestern Indiana. And this will be the region tonight we watch for the risk of those strong to severe storms. So Louisiana, Mississippi, coming out of Texas. So again, just take a look at that this evening here. That's where your severe weather threat's going to be. Getting into the overnight hours, we would not be surprised if there's enough cold air on the backside of this to support a little bit of snow coming in here through early in the morning. We've seen a couple of the models show up with that, so be prepared for some light snow in this area and also a bit farther to the north in Minnesota. But this low then begins to curl itself up into New England. We can see snow into southern Ontario and Quebec, but more risk of strong storms kind of following that frontal boundary into Tuesday night, slicing through parts of the southeast. So by the time we get into early Wednesday morning, the front is clearing parts of the mid-Atlantic, snow into parts of Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, and this is again delivering some of the first rainfall for a lot of these people in a very long time. Now, before I get into the GFS versus the European model, I want to show you where the pattern is going. So we're going to do like we did for the last couple of weeks and stare down at the top of the atmosphere right here on the North Pole. And here's that piece of the subtropical jet that's helping to fuel the instability. So if you remember seeing the flow comes in and around like that, that's what we're going to be watching. Okay, Monday, getting into Tuesday and Wednesday and all the way out there to Thanksgiving. Let's stop it right here early in the morning on Thanksgiving. One thing that has changed is the depth of what had been forecast for a pretty broad trough in this area. So we now start to see, well, the flow is not quite there. And as a result, the risk of these really cold temperatures coming down into Thanksgiving has backed off a bit. We talked a little bit about that on Friday. But what I'm going to be paying attention to after this is two pieces of the flow of the atmosphere into this weekend and early next week. The models are trying to extend a jet into the Pacific, but it gets about this far, dives into a trough, and then splits up across the west coast. The second piece is this strong subtropical branch of the jet stream that's going to go from Texas all the way exiting through the Carolinas and Virginia. So the problem with this pattern is it's going to leave much of the Pacific Northwest and California high and dry, but it's going to keep the South quite active with this setup. This setup is also no good for Midwest precip because the flow is coming over the top. It's convergent in this area. And we're going to have to wait to get into the south before we really pick up any sort of momentum that delivers rainfall. So that's out there to Tuesday the 28th. Let's finish the month of November, getting into early December, and it's a whole lot of the same. So what we'll need to be paying attention to is, can this jet extend further, or can we get it to block up and bust up here? That would increase the chances of having a more active pattern across North America. But as it stands, this is what the next 2 weeks really looks like. The lack of good flow into the Pacific Northwest into California simply means much drier conditions. So that's how the month of November is going to finish here, without a whole lot of activity. But do you know where that strong piece of the subtropical jet is? Right in through there. That's why from Texas along the Gulf Coast and up the East Coast here we see our best chances. Because that flow's splitting over the top, there's too much convergence here, which means we're still going to stay drier much of the mid and upper Mississippi Basin, getting into the Great Lakes, into Ontario and Quebec as well. So that's your setup, and I think it's a pretty robust setup right now being seen in the models. Okay, next 7 days. I just want to point out something important here. The European model continues to be our wetter of the two models. It's been that way for a while, and you can see these colors representing where the European's wetter over the next 7 days. This would be where the GFS is wetter. So for a lot of those folks down here in the very dry parts of the south, southeast Tennessee Valley, we're going to have some moisture coming through here. The European is the wetter model, and it's got better than 1.5 inches to 2 inches in this area. Now there's pockets where the GFS picks up being wetter, like in North Carolina, Virginia, and also in parts of Missouri, Illinois, Indiana. But outside of that, I see more of this shade of color than anything else, which represents a wetter European model. To compare the two, let's go ahead and do that. GFS is on the left, Europeans on the right. We've already seen through Monday into Tuesday. Let's get this out to where this system starts to put down some heavy snows Tuesday night into Wednesday morning in parts of New England. Interestingly enough, the European clears the front first. The GFS lets it linger a little bit longer. That's why we're a bit wetter in this area in the GFS compared to the European. But that system gets out. I'll show you the snowfall totals here in just a few seconds. And then what we're going to watch is there's a weak system that comes into the northwest on Thanksgiving. So we're going to have some snow to talk about right in through here. And then that system then sneaks right through parts of Wyoming, gets into Utah and Colorado by the time we get to midday Friday. And the models have been projecting this to come out. We talked about last week, right? Coming out here into the plains, delivering some snow into this area. Because as we do know, even though the depth of the cold is not what it was forecast before, there's still plenty of cold air for some snow. So this is getting, let's take it again, Friday morning into Saturday morning here. Let's play this out into Sunday morning. So you see that sliding through, sliding through there. And as it pops out, bringing a little bit of snow into this area. Now, at that point, the snow has backed off considerably from what some of the early forecasts showed, but there's going to be some white stuff flying in here, possibly around the Great Lakes too. And into early next week, the GFS is quick to toss a system through, the Canadian Maritimes. The Europeans a bit slower. So next Monday, Tuesday could see a little more snow into parts of New England here. But there's another part to this that's important to see, and that is that the GFS continues to bring, the European continues to bring systems across the south that the GFS isn't quite fully grabbing onto, which is why I continue to see wetter conditions here forecast by the European compared to the GFS. So that's your model comparison. Let's now look at some of the totals here. In fact, let's get to this. Here is the ECMWF. Let's blow that up one more time. So we're playing through Wednesday into Thursday. Let's get out there to Friday into Saturday. We're going to park it out here 1 week. That's your new 1 week total from the European. Comparing that to the GFS, I think overall there's decent similarities in this, but the nuances are in the local precipitation totals. Now we know a lot of this is coming into snow, but again, hitting some of these areas that have been very dry with some much needed rainfall here in parts of the Midwest and Mid-South. But let's go talk about that snow. Here's what the European is adding up. So take a look first at the heavy snows coming into parts of New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, maybe hitting a bit of Massachusetts, but Maine, good chance of picking up over 6 to 10 inches here out of this. But then we know we're watching on Thursday this system come through the northwest, dive into the Rocky Mountains, and then spread a little bit of that light snow farther to the east. So I'll just take this out there all the way to next Tuesday so we can kind of see where that heavy snow is. And you can get that eastern boundary of where we're expecting to have at least 4 inches out of the European model. Now let's go over to the GFS. That's 1 week out. Let's go ahead and take it out the same, to the same spot as the European did, and do a quick comparison. That's the European versus the GFS. So a lot of the high plains here, the central plains, got a better chance of picking up some snow, maybe a few inches out of this. And we'll wait to see what these snowfall totals look like as we approach that system on Thursday, getting into the weekend that's going to be delivering this. But we can supplement these forecasts by a quick look at the ensembles. So this is the probability of getting an inch through the next 10 days. Here's the chance of getting 3 inches for the next 10 days. So look, Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico, then spreading east. That's where we're expecting to get some decent snows. The west, the Sierra Nevada, the Cascades, left out of the flow, nothing really coming in here. But we're going to look for much higher amounts in New England. Take a look at this. That's the chance of getting 6 inches. Here's the chance of a foot. So pretty decent snowfall totals there. On the total precipitation side of it, this is the chance of getting, hang on a second, let's go back up to the probabilities. There we go. This is the chance of getting an inch over the next 10 days. So most of it coming with this current system and through here. You know, those deep reds are 90 to 100% chance of getting 1 inch of rainfall. So this again hits the area that's been developing in drought. And that's why these rains right now are so critical in this forecast. By day 10 though, I still don't like this. Now what I don't like about it is ridging west is dry. Flow coming out of the northwest is convergent. The subtropical jet, hooray, bring it on. Bring in the moisture into this area. And if we could get this pattern later in the winter, boy, we'd be curling up some big snowstorms for the East Coast. But as it stands, the convergent flow in the midsection of the country is why when we look out there into week 2, in fact, let's bring that up. Sorry, I thought I had it up next, but let's go to my report. This one here, and slide down. Sorry, I didn't have this queued up for you. Yeah, that's why the week 2 forecasts are drier and wet south. Very, I would say, easy picture to paint if the flow does this. Okay, now let's talk about those temperatures. This is the frost potential over the next 7 days. What's changed? The southern edge of this cold air has backed its way back north. There is the risk of getting some frost in the Central Valley of California with the pattern coming early and then again quite late. And to show you this, let's go take a look at those high temperatures. So on Monday today, take a look here. Getting into Tuesday into Wednesday, watch the warm up happening in the midsection of the country ahead of the colder air that's coming in on Thanksgiving. So a lot of cool air here to the south, but very warm for this time of year in the northern plains, which is quickly replaced on Thursday with a pretty dramatic temperature drop. So 60s for highs on Wednesday, 30s for high on Thursday. As we go from Thursday into Friday, the colder air really dives down the spine of the Rockies here, really into the front range, such that by Saturday into Sunday, we've let that cold air get all the way down here into southern Texas, where highs will struggle to be getting out of the upper 40s, lower 50s. Now, in this pattern, we watched last week's forecast suggest that these 5 days we're talking about right now will be much colder in this area. But that colder air seems to want to show up a little bit later in the time period, and this is out there day 5 through 10. Day 10 through 15 looks like this, and I'm just going to make a note here that even though the models, you saw what they were doing, splitting over the west, doing this, subtropical comes around the bottom side. Even though they look like this, I don't have a lot of confidence that the beginning of December starts like this. I want to make a case for you for that in the kind of the midterm forecast here, the week 2 to week 6, and then I want to talk about South America. So this is what I see changing. We have the MJO, which has just spent a tremendous amount of time, thanks to the Indian Ocean dipole, just living over here for a long time. That's over by Africa, okay, phase 1, phase 8. The newest forecasts are taking it out, moving it around. That's the first time we've seen a real decent breakaway in the position of the MJO. So whenever you see this, whenever I show you the MJO progressing, that means that the pattern across North America is not going to stay stagnant. It will evolve as we get into this month of December. We can also look at it another way. You can look at it with velocity potentials. This is today, and this is going forward. Now, if you remember back to several of the videos I showed you, in October and early November, these warm colors, which represent suppression, this is where air is sinking in the atmosphere. Do you remember? They were all stacked up here. But now they've got a slant to them, suggesting the MJO is moving. And the MJO movement can only happen if the trade wind lock has been broken. So what am I talking about? This westerly wind burst, these strong easterlies over here, well, the easterlies are fading with time. And where'd the westerly wind burst go once we get out here to finish November and start December? That's El Nino not holding onto the pattern. And that's why we look out and see that the new European model looks something like this for the month of December, but we've got to call this into question. Because can you really keep it dry in the Northwest if you got that much MJO movement, which is ultimately going to affect the jet stream? Can you keep the subtropical jet going? Probably. I think this is a robust signal here, maybe in the Southwest as well. But I don't think it's going to be as dry as advertised here. That's a big question. So to give you a little bit of supporting evidence for that, I do agree with the newest update from the CPC. We looked at this a bit on Friday. Their week 3, week 4 forecast starting on December 2nd going to the 15th. We're a bit mild northern tier of the U.S., but they've only got one spot here really showing up with a better chance than not of being drier than average. It's the northern plains in Montana. But wetter with equal chances. I can see where they got this forecast given the movement of the MJO. Remember, they also released this last week as well. This is their new December outlook. A little bit different flavor from the European model. Notice not forecasting the dryness here and better activity in the midsection of the country. I think that this is a pattern that could shift once we get out there past maybe the 3rd, 4th, and 5th of the month. There's quite a bit that's going to be moving around in the month of December. Otherwise, I do want to show you again the seasonal drought outlook. And again, what we're looking for are these shades of color like these, suggesting drought improvement in some of these really, really key dry areas going forward in December, January, February this year. Now, I want to review one last time the newest December, January, February update from the IRI multi-model probability forecast system. And again, this is the most, I guess I'd say, generous of all the forecasts in terms of precipitation through winter. You can tell that it's limiting the risk of being very, very dry. And given that this El Nino, which looks something like this today, is likely to reach a peak in the next 45 to 60 days, there's still quite a bit of warm water to upwell here. This is going to be, kind of an interesting transitional story once we get out there past the beginning of the new year. I do want to point out one thing. While this El Nino looks pretty strong here, our strongest ones usually contain a lot of warm water in this whole area. So what's interesting about this El Nino is that there's the negative phase of the Pacific meridional mode, and we've got some cold water in the Gulf of Alaska. So these two things are kind of working a bit against El Nino dominating everything going into winter, which is why I'm tending to side a bit with this forecast that was given by Columbia University here. Now, from this point, I want to transition to South America, and I'm sure a lot of you heard this. I just pulled up an NPR article about it. Apparently, Taylor Swift had to postpone a show in Brazil after too much excessive heat. This was over the weekend. But things have been changing a bit in Brazil, which are going to work against what has been for the last month some of the driest conditions from October 15 to November 15 across some very key growing areas. I mean, just stop and look at this map because it shows the problems, the flooding to the south near record wettest and the incredible dryness to the north. Now, what's changed is seen on satellite here. This was yesterday as the frontal boundary was advancing to the north. It's clearing things out behind it, but we can see ahead of it some decent convection. We can see along it some stronger storms, and this is moving into this area that really needs to get quite a bit of moisture in to revive the crop and to break the heat away from this spot. I did want to point out that if we look down here farther to the south, in fact, let's put some other labels on this if I could click on that. I can't seem to get it to show up. But you come down here a bit farther to the south. This is the Paraná River that runs through here. We talked last week about kind of flooding along the Paraná River. I did pull up a map of the Paraná River, our time series. Now, this is over a whole year, but I want to point out, if you look at this label here, Nível de Evacuación, I think this just means river level of evacuation, maybe we're at flood level. You can see that we've been up here in several of the reporting areas along the Paraná River. So it's flooding after, a year ago down where it was only about a meter deep. We're now 6 meters deep. So a major change in the depth of that river. You come into Argentina, I want to show you some other things. Like, let's begin first, how about middle of Buenos Aires province? If we click in through here and find a station, you can see it, 9 de Julio, I guess you'd say this. Decent spring rains have come back in parts of Buenos Aires as of late. If we slide a bit farther to the west, let's go pick up this station here. This is Pilar, south of Cordoba. They had up to this point had one decent rain. They've now had a second one, 20 millimeter rain that came through. Still significant drought over toward Cordoba, but there has been some moisture that's come back in. And maybe we just come up here and hit near Santa Fe. We'll pick up on this station here. This is just a bit south of Santa Fe. This is the 50 millimeter mark, so there have been a couple of decent events that have come through here, helping to break the long-standing drought that they endured coming out of winter into early spring. So there's been some better moisture, but what's adding up here in the next 10 days is even more. So the models are attempting to revive some moisture into places that desperately need it. This is going to continue to cause flooding concerns here, but there's some moisture coming into some of those driest areas in the last month. The holdout is going to be farther to the north and to the east. Okay? So lastly, just want to finish up with one more figure for you today. It's just to show you internationally what some of the weather is looking like. Europe has had an extremely stormy last 30 to 40 days. There's still more of that coming here across Central and Eastern Europe, then eventually getting over into this part of Russia. We also note that that corner of Brazil that's going to remain drier in this pattern is showing up here. But the thing I wanted to point out is Australia. It's quite rare during an El Nino event for this much wet weather to hit eastern Australia. Normally that is the driest spot of Australia when there is an El Nino. Yet we're going to be seeing some relatively heavy rainfall amounts in this particular part, Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, getting all the way up here in Northern Territory and South Australia too, over near Adelaide. Quite a bit of very wet weather here, uncharacteristic of a strong El Nino. So that's why we have to look at all flavors of it. And there's some subseasonal factors that are influencing it. I look forward to talking about all of them throughout this week. So thanks for hanging on here a bit longer on a Monday morning. But we had a lot to cover, and we'll talk again on Tuesday. Thanks.